Let's talk about hitting the absolute wall. It's 2005 and I have already entirely burnt out on the offline misery of the first game, the jarring load screens, the brain-dead AI companions, and that relentlessly stressful virus gauge had completely drained my patience. But because this franchise has had its hooks in me since I was 6 years old, I still walked into the shop and bought Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. I think I was desperately hoping Capcom had realised the error of their ways and completely overhauled the offline experience for those of us stuck without a broadband connection. They hadn't. Booting up File 2 was one of the quickest reality checks of the error. Within the first hour, it became painfully obvious that it wasn't a sequel. It was literally just the second half of the original game's development cycle that got chopped off and sold as a separate box. The menus were the same, the character roster of random civilians was exactly the same, the AI was still actively trying to get me killed by hoarding all the green herbs, and worst of all, that ticking clock was still right there on the screen, constantly threatening to turn my blood into acid if I took too long looking at the scenery. I didn't even finish it. I pushed through a couple of the scenarios, got incredibly frustrated by the exact same clunky mechanics that ruined the first game, and just gave up. I popped the disc out and walked away. The industry was moving incredibly fast. The gaming magazines were plastered with screenshots of Leon Kennedy in a European village, and I simply didn't have the time or the patience to wrestle with a broken multiplayer game. I wanted Resident Evil 4, and I was more than happy to leave Raccoon City behind to get it. That felt like the definitive end of my relationship with the Outbreak series. Fast forward a couple of decades, the dust has settled, we all know exactly how the franchise evolved, reinvented itself, lost its way, and then reinvented itself all over again. The landscape of survival horror is entirely different now. When you get older, your relationship with the media you grew up with fundamentally changes. You aren't an impatient teenager anymore, desperately waiting for the next big revolutionary entry to drop. You become a fan who just wants to run the old games back to recapture that specific, quiet pressure of a classic survival horror experience. You want the tank controls, the strange camera angles, and the convoluted inventory puzzles. It was with that mindset that I finally decided to pull File 2 off the shelf and give it another try. I wasn't looking at it as a stepping stone to Resident Evil 4 anymore. I was just looking for an excuse to spend a few hours back in the classic era, and from that completely different perspective, the entire game suddenly started to click. Without the massive, heavy expectations of the 2005 release calendar weighing it down, the jank didn't feel quite so offensive. I knew the AI was going to be terrible, so I stopped trying to rely on them and started treating them like moving distractions for the zombies. I knew the virus gauge was going to be annoying, so I just accepted it as a harsh environmental hazard. When you stop fighting the game for what it isn't, and just accept it for the weird, highly experimental side project that it is, File 2 actually transforms into a genuinely fascinating piece of history.
Take a look at this. It's a map of this place back when it was an art museum. There should be a ventilation tunnel in the ground.
And that'll get us out of here?
It should, but it's so narrow you might be the only one who can fit through.
So I'll get help and come back, right? Looks like it's a race against time.
Now that we've lost communications, there's nothing else we can do. All right, everyone. We've got to hurry up and find a way into that tunnel. It's going to be our way out of here.
If there was one single piece of content that managed to break through my initial wall of frustration back in the day, it was the desperate times scenario. Even when I was actively hating the mechanics, the sheer nostalgic pull of this level was impossible to ignore. Capcom knew exactly what they were doing here. They dropped us right back into the Raccoon City Police Department, but they set the clock back a few days before Leon and Claire ever pull into town. The station isn't completely dead yet. You get to see the chaotic, final, hopeless stand of the RPD officers trying to hold the line against the impossible horde, and right at the centre of it is Marvin Branner, getting to actually fight alongside Marvin, helping him board up the windows and gather supplies before he eventually sustains the bite we all knew was coming in Resident Evil 2, is an incredible piece of lore building. It bridges the gap between the games perfectly. You spend the scenario running through those iconic hallways, recognising the statues and the locked doors, but the context is completely different. Instead of quietly exploring a tomb, You are actively trying to barricade the precinct against the siege. It completely shifts the tone of the location we all know like the back of our hands. Even if you despise the Outbreak control scheme, returning to the RPD in full 3D and watching the precinct physically fall apart around you makes Desperate Times an absolute standout chapter in the entire classic era. When you step back and look at what File 2 was actually trying to achieve, you realise just how unbelievably far ahead of the curve Capcom really was. It's incredibly easy to look at the clunky tank controls, the frustration virus gauge and the terrible offline AI and write the whole thing off as a failed experiment, but the core design philosophy of Outbreak is something the rest of the gaming industry wouldn't properly catch up to for another half a decade. The game was essentially Left 4 Dead 2, built on PlayStation 1 mechanics. It was a 4-player cooperative zombie shooter where you had to share your limited resources, heal each other, barricade environments, and dynamically react to an unpredictable, overwhelming horde. The underlying idea was absolute genius. The only problem was that the technology of 2004 simply could not support the vision. The internet infrastructure, especially here in the UK, just wasn't ready to handle complex, real-time cooperative survival horror without buckling under the weight of the terrible lag and the brutal load times. The PS2 hardware was choking on the sheer ambition of rendering 4 distinct players, a horde of zombies, and interactive 3D environments all at once. Capcom wasn't making a bad game, they were just chasing a market that didn't actually exist yet. If the exact same design document had been executed 2 console generations later, with seamless voice chat, drop-in multiplayer, broadband as a standard, and instant loading screens, it would have been a massive phenomenon. It's a tragic case of the right idea at the exact wrong time. The mechanics were sound, the atmosphere was there, but it was hopelessly trapped inside a plastic box that just didn't have the horsepower to let it breathe.
Time to go! Yeah!
Oh dear, help!
George!
For a long time, it felt like Capcom had completely swept the Outbreak series under the rug. With the lack of a traditional protagonist and a bizarre, disjointed scenario structure, it was incredibly easy to assume that Cindy, David, Kevin, and the rest of the survivors were non-canon filler. They felt like generic avatars created purely to serve a multiplayer mode, destined to be forgotten the second the servers were finally shut down. But one of the most brilliant things about Capcom is that they never truly forgot about their history, no matter how clunky it might be. Fast forward to 2017, you are walking through the Baker family mansion in Resident Evil 7, soaking in the new first-person perspective, and you find a newspaper clipping lying around detailing the mysterious disappearances in Louisiana. If you look closely at the byline of the article, it is written by none other than Elisa Ashcroft, the lock-picking investigative reporter from the Outbreak roster. That tiny, easily missed Easter egg completely recontextualizes these weird PS2 spin-offs. It confirms that the events of Jay's Bar, the RPD siege, and even fighting a zombified elephant in the Raccoon City Zoo are entirely canon. These random civilians did survive the outbreak, and they are out there living the rest of their lives in the wider world. It proves that Capcom didn't hate the Outbreak concept. They didn't bury it because it was a mistake. They just vaulted it. They put the idea in cold storage for a few decades, waiting for the technology to finally catch up to what they were trying to build. Seeing Alessa's name in a modern mainline title was a massive vindication for anyone who suffered through the offline misery of 2004, and seeing a return for Resident Evil Requiem as the mother of the new protagonist is an absolute jaw-dropping moment we never would have expected from Capcom.
Marvin!
Hey, you made it!
Sorry to keep you waiting. I'm headed your way now. I'll pull the truck up to the front gate, so get everyone together there. I won't be able to keep that position long, so hurry up, okay? I'll contact you again later.
All right, be careful.
Which brings us to the modern era and the massive unspoken potential of the RE engine. Over the last few years, we have watched Capcom flawlessly recreate the suffocating atmosphere of the classic games with modern remakes. They have perfected the over-the-shoulder tension, the intricate inventory management, and the terrifying photorealistic lighting. We have all the pieces for a perfect survival horror experience, but there is still one massive gap in the market. There are subtle signs that Capcom is testing the waters for multiplayer again. We've seen them try and fail with bolt-on modes like Resistance and Reverse, but they always felt like frantic, asymmetric deathmatches rather than actual survival horror. What the modern landscape desperately needs is a true, authentic return to the Outbreak formula. Imagine a sprawling, co-op Raccoon City built from the ground up on the RE engine. Picture yourself physically pushing bookcases in front of a door inside Jay's bar, with 3 of your mates frantically trading shotgun shells in a seamless inventory menu, with clear voice chat and absolutely zero loading screens cutting the tension. The frustration jank of 2004 is gone, replaced by the buttery smooth mechanics of the Resident Evil 2 remake. The gaming world is finally ready for a slow, methodical cooperative survival horror campaign. I just wasn't ready back then, and neither was the hardware. But today, an Outbreak revival wouldn't just work, it would absolutely dominate the genre. So here we are at the very end of the PlayStation 2 spin-off era. Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 is a bizarre, fascinating and deeply flawed piece of survival horror history. If you look at it strictly through the lens of 2005, it was a frustrating, clunky mess that felt entirely out of touch with what the player base actually wanted. We didn't have the internet connections, we didn't have the patience for the AI, and we were entirely exhausted by the constant detours. But looking back at it now, decades later, you have to respect the sheer audacity of what Capcom was trying to pull off. They looked at the slow, isolated, methodical pacing of the classic survival horror and tried to adapt it for a massive cooperative online world. It was a brilliant concept that was simply suffocated by the technological limitations of its time. It was a blueprint for a genre that wouldn't truly explode until years later. And with that, we are officially packing our bags and leaving Raccoon City behind. The table is finally cleared, the awkward experiments, the light gun games and the offline multiplayer lobbies are completely done. The classic fixed camera tank control era of Resident Evil has breathed its absolute last gasp. Next time, everything changes. The claustrophobic hallways of pre-rendered backgrounds are gone. We are heading to a remote, dreary village somewhere in rural Spain. Shinji Mikami is stepping back into the director's chair, the camera is moving right over Leon S. Kennedy's shoulder, and the entire landscape of third-person action games is about to be rewritten overnight. It is finally time to talk about the absolute juggernaut that is Resident Evil 4. Before a zombified elephant completely flattens your entire survival group, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a comment down below and let me know if you managed to navigate the absolute chaos of Raccoon City Zoo back in the day, and hit that like button while you finally enjoy the sheer luxury of being able to walk and shoot at the exact same time.
Go, go!
Marvin!
Don't worry about me! Just get going!
No way! I'm not leaving you behind!
Whoa! Oh my god!